Barnaby. I am a man with a full life, full of rich experiences, and yet without DABCHICK it is strangely a hollow and wind-blown existence. When may we see him again?
Hi folks, Barnaby Dixon here. So a fair few months ago I shared the plight of this channel's main mascot, DABCHICK. So the plastic from which he's almost entirely comprised started breaking down and he would need a full rebuild. But if I invest the time to rebuild him, am I just going to be in the same situation a few years from now when the plastic starts degrading again? I think I need an entirely new approach. So join me on this video series as I attempt to resurrect an obnoxious icon.
An obnoxious icon.
So I have a confession to make. I can't CAD. I know the absolute basics, but I'm very bad at it, and I don't want to spend a long time learning how to CAD when I can already sculpt by hand, and I think a lot of DABCHICK's aesthetic charm comes from his handmade look. So if there was some way to digitally 3D scan DABCHICK so I can digitally back him up and then 3D print him, that's the approach I'd like to take. Now, I have worked with 3D printing before for a theatre project a few years ago where me and my team had to print the mechanisms for some larger scale puppets. However, DABCHICK is a lot smaller and I don't just want to print his mechanisms, I want to see how much of him is actually printable. I don't know how much is principled.
Not terribly much.
But first we have to find out whether 3D scanning is even a possibility. So after a fair bit of research, I discovered a guy out of Germany called Thomas Magel who has a website called openscan.eu, and he's been developing for the last 6 years this hobbyist 3D scanner. I'm a bit more inclined, I'd say, to go the hobbyist route actually. In the past, I've invested in higher end stuff, and when something goes wrong with those products, it can be so complicated to figure out what has gone wrong and how to fix it. Whereas I think with the hobbyist stuff, the customers are hobbyists, so it's not their job and they don't want to waste too much time or money troubleshooting and all this kind of thing. So I think they generally gravitate towards more reliable products, and you will find forums online where people help each other and guide each other through certain processes. And I think it was on one of these sites where I read a really good review of this scanner. So I went ahead and bought one and assembled it with my cat. So the scanner works in kind of an interesting way. It uses a process called photogrammetry. Let me show you how that works in practice. So we have a camera here that moves around, taking pictures as it does. And at the same time, you have the object that you're photographing on this little podium, and that turns simultaneous to this movement. So what you're left with is a whole bunch of pictures of the object from a variety of angles. You can then drag those pictures into a software. I'm using a free app called PhotoCatch from the App Store. It works very well. Now you can get some pretty good results just like this, but if you want better results, you can do a little bit of surface prepping, and that looks a little bit like this. So here's a test where I sprayed down the object with a light dusting of chalk spray, and what this does is adds all these tiny dots on the object that serve as reference points that help the software figure out the shape of the object. So I wanted to really challenge the setup, so I found a really small object in the form of this cog. Now because the cog is already white, I surface prepped it with some red dye. I should say I made a really big mess of the surface prepping, and the object is very small, but even still, the results are pretty impressive. I was so impressed by the scanner's capabilities that I reached out to Thomas to see if he would sponsor this video. So if you'd like to buy one of these from openscan.eu, you can use the code Barnaby at the checkout, and that should give you 5% off. It also gives this channel a little kickback too, so you'll be supporting DABCHICK in his rehabilitation. I swapped the podium out of mine for a device that I'd made in the form of this C-shaped clamp. These spikes are able to screw inwards and hold the object very steadily. I thought it was solving another problem too. Because this podium is opaque, I figured it would be blocking the object from the camera at certain points throughout the pass, which is true, but it's a problem that can be easily solved by doing two passes, one of the object in this position and one of the object in this position. And in regards to steadiness, you can just use something sticky on the base of it really to keep it just as steady as this thing. So this really is extra and it's not needed, and I feel a little bit embarrassed for spending so much time making it. But it looks cool and it was very useful in the process of scanning DABCHICK piece by piece. So once all the pieces were scanned, I was able to drag the files into Blender and assemble a digital version of DABCHICK, and this looks just as good as I'd hoped. At this point, I want to say a huge thank you to my patrons over at patreon.com/barnabydixon for the continued financial support that enables me to do projects like this. Obviously, we're only partway through this project, so if you'd also like to help DABCHICK in his rehabilitation process, here is a link to my Patreon. Thanks very much in advance. If you'd like to see more of these videos, do remember to subscribe, hit notifications, and hopefully you can join us next time as I attempt to free DABCHICK from his digital confines.
Digital confines.